People who have been lost in the wilderness, stuck somewhere deserted, lost at sea, etc. What's your story? Hopefully this doesn't get buried, but about 3 years ago I struggled severely with depression and wanting to self-unalive. Those thoughts later manifested into plots. I'd stay up at night thinking about how I wanted to go out of this world. I thought about pills, self-injuries, all the cliche stuff you see in the movies. Although I eventually decided upon a slow bleed method, I constructed a plan to make the 2-hour drive from my house to the Inyo National Forest after work on a Friday and then get lost. The plan was simple and stupid. I'd try to survive as long as possible until something killed me, be it dehydration or fatigue or whatever else nature had to throw my way. I ordered some survival essentials on Amazon, packed a bag, and left as planned. I don't know what made this slow bleed idea so seductive, but my mind was set to it. I had no idea where I was going, but that drive felt like I was 10 again and on my way to Disneyland with my parents for the first time. I felt so overjoyed and relieved. I got there, parked my car behind some bushes, and started walking. It was about 5 o'clock, and the sun was falling quick, bad planning on my part, so I started running deeper and deeper into the forest. I would run, then tire, so I'd walk a while, then run again, and I repeated this process for about 3 hours. I stopped at a clearing in the trees. It was a round little patch of mostly dead grass and leaves. I pitched my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and I fell asleep, as happy as can be. The next morning was far less tranquil, however. I woke up feeling like I had a terrible hangover, and I had no idea where I was or how I'd gotten there for at least 5 minutes. I began breathing rapidly, and I started jogging in random directions trying to retrace my steps. I ended up getting even more lost and separating myself from my gear and tent. I tried telling myself that this is what I wanted, but for some reason I knew that it wasn't anymore. I remember repeating "no choice" over and over again. That was a really cold night. I tried doing push-ups to keep me warm, but that hardly lasted. I tried singing Vienna by Billy Joel, but I was too cold and my teeth kept chattering, although the cold was nothing compared to the fear. Every falling leaf or trickling sound of a stream was a vicious predator in my mind. There was a point where I couldn't tell whether I was shaking from fear or the cold or a mixture of both. Finally, the morning came and I slept through most of the day on the ground with my back to a fallen tree stump. I woke up at around 3 p.m. and once again I panicked. I began jogging in a seemingly random direction once again until I hit the road I came on. That feeling of relief was something I will never be able to explain. It humbled me yet lifted me up. I walked up the road until a very nice old man in a big black truck pulled over to see if I needed help. I told him I was hiking and got lost. He drove me up to the road, up to my car, and I drove home. That weekend changed everything for me. I never had wanting to self-unaliving thoughts again, and I got the help I needed to deal with my depression. This isn't much of a survival story, but the whole experience changed my point of view on life and self-worth. I'm still working on constructing a suitable life for myself, but whenever I'm discouraged or I want to quit, I think back to that night in the forest, and after a quick shudder, I realize just how much my life means to me. It was a stupid plan, but I'm glad that it was. I may not have survived a slightly more elaborate one. Next story. I was at a friend's cabin and went squirrel hunting alone at dawn with his dog. I had been at the cabin for a few days and thought I had acquired a good knowledge of the local area. After about an hour of trekking through moderately heavy maple forest, I realized I was lost. There was no cell phone coverage, I had no compass, and the sky was overcast. It is a terrifying feeling, not knowing where you are, or even which way is north. I wandered around aimlessly for another hour, looking for a familiar landmark, but I was getting nowhere. Out of desperation, I turned to the dog, and in an upbeat voice said, "Let's go home. It's time to go eat." The dog quickly turned around and started bounding over a ridge. 15 minutes later, we were back at the cabin. I still remember how I hooted once I knew I was safe. Now I never go into the woods without a compass and whistle, and I always let someone know where I'm going and when I expect to return. And yes, the dog ate very well that day. Next story. Me and my friends love outdoorsy stuff. One day we decided to drive a few hours to do some spelunking. That's caving. This particular cave is near a river, so it has a maze of streams inside of it and a waterfall. Being young and stupid, we didn't have much of a plan and took off. Well, turns out it started raining while we were inside. The rain partially flooded the cave and sealed off a lot of passageways. It was unreal. You could actually see the water level swelling up. Needless to say, we cracked some bricks and did some incredibly stupid stuff like swimming some of the flooded narrowways. We came out starving, dehydrated, cold, and bleeding. Turns out, we had spent around 13 or so hours in the cave. Next story. Okay, so when I was like 8 years old, my mom and I moved in with a friend of hers who had a son several years older than me. Let's call him Travis. Travis was an effing psychopath. I was really into stage magic at the time, and had just received a little magician outfit with the hat and cape and everything, so keep my outfit in mind. One day, Travis was watching wrestling on TV and got super amped, so we went out to the trampoline where he proceeded to beat the crap out of me while screaming about the culinary endeavors of The Rock and farting on my face. Anyway, he accidentally sat on my face and broke my nose. I was crying, there was blood, and he knew he was about to get in trouble, so he decided to lead me off into the woods under the pretext of taking me to a nearby relative to find band-aids. Well, he ditched me in the woods, in a magician costume. I wandered around crying for a while before remembering some bullcrap from school about leaving behind markers if you ever get lost so that you know you're walking in circles or whatever. So I started removing my outfit and leaving parts of it hanging from trees. At some point, I stumbled upon a neighbor who was oddly nonchalant about the half-dressed little boy coming out of the woods in tightly whities and a magician hat, with blood all over his face. Next story. I'm not extravagant. I was simply walking down the road to my cottage that is surrounded by forest, and I said to him, "Why have we never explored the forest?" So off we went, carelessly losing our position in the woods. We found some guy's cottage and asked him how to get home. Then we got home. It really is a horrible story. It lacks suspense or character in any way, but it's true, and it's mine. Next story. This actually happened to me about a month ago. I'm a hunter. It's a great way for me to escape the everyday hustle and bustle and just sit alone in the woods, watching it either wake up or go to sleep. This particular day I was deer hunting about 20 feet up a tree, and anyone who hunts knows that you go all the way until dark, pack up your stuff, and then come out. Sunset was around 5 p.m., and I sat in the tree till about 5:40, and then climbed down from the tree, packed up my stuff, and realized I didn't have a flashlight. No big deal, I've got my cell phone. Oops, 5% battery left. Because I'm so far out of the woods, it's a long hike in, that it was searching for a signal the whole time and it drained itself. So I shut off my phone to conserve battery. I figure, oh well, I'll be fine. I'll start walking back now. Even though I spend a lot of time outdoors and practically spent every weekend as a kid in the woods, even I can get lost. There's a moment that I just can't describe where you realize that you are lost. You have no flashlight and you have no idea which way to go. It's a pretty unsettling feeling, but you want to remain calm. You're panicking on the inside, but you know that will do no good to panic, so you try to calm yourself down. I did this for a while, before I decided to just sit down. By this time, I'd been lost in the woods, in the dark, with no flashlight for about 3 hours. It was overcast night and a new moon, so I had zero light to work with. I decided to sit down and take inventory of what I had, and remain as calm as I could. I took out my cell phone and sent my fiancé a text that said, "Phone dying, lost in the woods, may spend the night here. I won't die, promise, love you," and turned off my phone, in case I needed that 3% to make an emergency call. It was now around 9 p.m. I realized that I wasn't going to die out there in the woods, but I wasn't going to have a fun night either. I did have a gun, plenty of ammo, good clothing, and a bottle of water. Oh, and a full pack of cigarettes. I could start a fire and be fine. Wait, I could start a fire. I could build a torch. Why didn't I think of this before? I had some paracord that I had in my hunting pack that I typically use to pull my gun up a tree with after I've climbed it. So I cut off a section of it and bundled up a few leaves and sticks and barks and made a torch. It was wet, so I used some lip balm on the string to get it going a little better, and the torch worked. Not perfectly, but now I could see. I ended up eventually finding a trail that I knew, even in the dimly lit torch darkness, and hiked out from there to my vehicle. If it weren't for that cigarette lighter, I'd probably have spent the night there. Got to my truck, called my fiance who was freaking out, and headed home for a cold beer. Next story. I went geocaching one time with some family friends. We split up into groups, and in my group I had a 15-year-old, a 13-year-old, and a 7-year-old. Now, our parents had set up the spot, so all they did was give us the coordinates written down on a sheet of paper, a GPS, and send us off. We found our 2 spots, no problem. They were less than a mile from our campsite, but when we plugged in the coordinates to our final spot, it came up with 3.2 miles. Okay, whatever, how long could it be? We set out in t-shirts, flip-flops, with nothing but the clothes on our back and a GPS. First hour was great. We were hiking the deep Rocky Mountains. It was a beautiful day and we were off the trail, so everything was pristine. After that, though, we began to wonder if our coordinates had been copied down correctly. I mean, we had to cross 2 barbed wire fences. Looking back, that should have been a warning sign. The littlest 7-year-old of our group wanted to turn back, but we were only a mile away and we didn't want to have hiked so far only to return empty-handed. So we kept going. It took us another few hours to finish that mile because we were hiking steep uphill now. What's worse, the sky was beginning to cloud over, and before long it was pouring, and then it began to hail. So here I was, standing on the top of some godforsaken mountain in charge of 3 kids who were wearing flip-flops, t-shirts, and huddling under a tree, covering their ears whenever lightning flashed and thunder sounded. We all wanted to turn back, but we were only 0.8 miles away. We waited the rain out and continued on, knee-deep in grass and mud. When we got there, there was nothing. As expected, only a grassy slope with scattered trees. We started back downhill and kept walking until we found a road, and then we hid in the grass while our little 7-year-old stood on the side of the road to grab a ride. Not my best idea either. And when that failed, apparently a 7-year-old on the side of a mountain road is suspicious, we hiked about 5 miles back to find our parents frantic with search and rescue rangers blowing whistles. So, yeah, fun times. Next story. This story didn't involve me getting lost, but I was separated from a friend in the middle of nowhere, and he was almost delirious from the heat and dehydration when I found him. I grew up in a small mining town in the Pilbara region of Western Australia. When I was a kid, the town was still pretty small and only had about 3,000 people in it. The town is basically surrounded by dry, arid bushland and desert further out. There's a dam and other places with water nearby, but massive expanses of nothing much in between them. One day, some of my schoolmates were bragging about riding their push bikes all the way to a roadhouse on the Great Northern Highway, roughly halfway between our town and the next. The roadhouse was a good 2 to 2.5 hour drive, with a mostly 110 kilometers per hour speed limit, but there were crap loads of hills on the way, and the summer sun in the Pilbara is blazing hot. Riding your push bike there as a 13 to 14-year-old kid would have just been about impossible without some serious preparation. Rest stops, water, sunblock, some kind of transportable shade, etc. They claimed they did it with nothing but their school uniforms and some water from a puddle on the way. Now I knew they had to be lying and decided to put the ringleader in his place. He was the only other guy my size in the school, was way better at sports, and never let me forget it. I challenged him in front of probably 20 other kids, who were mostly members of his unofficial fan club, to do the ride again with me. I would take supplies and crap in case he wanted to give up, and he could replicate his feat of living off the land like a true pioneering trailblazer. To my surprise, instead of the expected response of turning me down with some cop-out about how I was stupid for suggesting it, he agreed. To my even greater surprise, that Saturday morning, he turned up at the meeting point just on the edge of town with nothing but a shirt, shorts, shoes, and his bike. There was a water bottle in the holder on his bike frame, but it was only a quarter full. We idiotically kicked things off at a fast pace, like we were going to get there and back by lunchtime. And when we started to get tired, half an hour later, I started to lag behind him. Eventually, we got to a twisty bit of road where the highway cut through some large rocky hills, and I lost sight of him going around a bend. I was absolutely buggered at that point, so I stopped and rested for about 10 minutes. When I kept going, there was no sight of him at all. Even on the next big straight that came up, I don't know exactly how long, but I kept going. I started to panic. that he would actually collapse from dehydration just 2 minutes down the road, so I kept going. Eventually, I was so exhausted that I couldn't pedal the bike uphill and I had to walk it. The road was so hot that my feet were hot through my shoes. I gave up, and it was probably the most horrible I'd ever felt before. I was sure that I had gotten him killed. As I was coasting back down the road about 30 minutes later, I saw a small goat track running down the side of a hill that led into a small crop of trees, and decided to rest in the shade. When I got most of the way down the track, I saw his bike laying in the dirt, and immediately started calling his name. When I found him, he was sitting down on a tree root, throat too parched to make any sound. I gave him a bottle of water, which he drank too fast, and then spent a good 2 minutes coughing and spluttering. We were both absolutely rooted. Eventually, we walked our bikes back up the road, and were lucky enough to get rescued by a dude in a ute. Utility vehicle, Australian version of a pickup truck. When we got back, we went round to my parents' house and played the Sega inside for about 3 hours, and then he went home. I fell asleep at like 4 p.m. and still didn't get up until my mom came in to find out what was wrong with me at 9 a.m. on Sunday. I never told them what actually happened. I just said we'd been building jumps at the bike track in the bush, just over the road all day. At lunch break on Monday, my new friend left his other mates to come find me, invited me over to play Foursquare with them. They thought he was planning to make a fool of me, and started making little jabs about how I was totally wrong about them riding to the roadhouse, and I just nodded and said, yeah, he showed me, and that was that. We were never close friends, but he always respected me after that, and didn't encourage the other guys when they gave me a hard time anymore. We both ended up being part of this silly initiative that the school had come up with called the School Council years later. He was the recreational guy, I can't remember the titles, and I was the environment guy. He and I also went to the city together as the sports and debate captains respectively for a couple of school trips. Oi, from the brink of death to brotherhood, or sort of. Sorry, that's a bad Australian accent. I'm also sick still, sorry guys. Next story. Driving in the middle of a state I'd never been to. 4 in the morning in someone I didn't know's car on a highway I didn't know. As I typed in the only address I knew onto my phone, it died. I was in the dark really for the first time. I thought I would be sleeping in the car. I was scared, angry, and really afraid like I hadn't been before. After 10 minutes driving alone on a 2-lane road, I tried to innovate. Like a gift from God, I found a smartphone in my back seat. Password protected, I used the emergency call feature and called 911. Asking for non-emergency help. The operator understood my situation, and as I described my foreignness to what was around me and what buildings, signs, and roads I saw, he was able to direct me to where I needed to go. I was truly put to the test that day, and I felt like someone was really looking out for me. Next story. There's a road called Clinton Road by me where some really weird crap goes down. So one day a few friends and I were feeling brave on a summer night and decided to pull over and explore this road. We went off deep into the woods on this most haunted road, which weird crap did seem to happen. But the craziest was when we wandered off and found the ruins of a castle. I mean straight out of a devil horror movie. We were exploring when suddenly 2 guys dressed in some very racist uniforms pulled shotguns on us and asked if we wanted to join their brotherhood. Freaked out, I said that I really didn't want to get involved, and they got in our faces, asked if we support those ruining our history. I told them we would join, but we wanted to lock up the car first before they did this ritual thing to us. We got to the car with them not far behind us and risked it. We effing ran into the car and drove away as fast as we could. I don't know if the guns were loaded or not, but the adrenaline took over and we were petrified. Had no other way out. Not really totally what you're looking for, but happened in a very crappy place. Next story. Anaheim Lake, British Columbia, 1967. I had only arrived that day. My friends, Mike and his wife, had gone to town for groceries and left me at the cabin with the dog. I decided to go for a walk. Tybolt and I look off across the road and into the woods. After strolling around for a while, I crossed back over the road and continued on. I climbed up some ridges, wandered down in the little hollows, not paying much attention to where I was. I had never been in big woods before, nor so far north. I began to tire and think about food, so I decided to head back to the cabin. I then realized in one heart-stopping moment that I had no idea where I was. I could feel the panic building way down inside me, ready to reduce me to a peeing, screaming imbecile. I scrambled up a ridge, and then a tree at the top of it, to look out. I saw an ocean of jack pines, dark, forbidding trees in all directions. Nothing relieved the monotony of those trees. Nothing. No one knew where I was. I remembered a map I had, back in the truck of course, which showed what the cabin was 7 miles from the nearest house to the east, 90 miles to the west, 400 miles to the north, and the same to the south. I was fighting off panic with every breath and on the edge of losing the battle. I was lost, and I knew in my churning guts, I knew I could die right there. Tybalt seemed unconcerned. Stupid dog. I sat still, again on the ground, afraid. I had no thoughts. I was paralyzed, unable to move. Somehow, I found, somewhere inside of me, underneath the roaring terror, a place that was dead calm. I had no idea it was there, but I found it. I looked out from that place within and saw clearly everything around me. After a long moment, I felt a tug, right in my middle, strong and clear. Without a thought, I got up and followed that steady pull. I walked straight to the cabin as if I were on a well-marked path. I didn't tell this story for years, and I still don't understand it. Next story. I was alone hiking on a hill trail in a nature reserve near sunset when I suddenly ran out of trail. It was not a well-traveled route and the trails had overgrown. I tried turning around but couldn't see where I came from. It was 15 minutes to sunset, there was no phone signal, and I was starting to panic. I guessed that I was probably close to the northern side, so I kept the last rays of sunlight to my left as I trekked northwards. I finally found a fence and followed it, climbing over rocks and through thorn bushes until I found a gate out of the place. It was locked. Fortunately, someone heard my calls for help. From then on, I always hike with a partner. There's less chance of getting lost, and even if we do get lost, it's calming and safer to get lost with company. It's also good to have a traveling partner in case one person gets hurt and needs help. Lesson learned. Next story. Alright, here it goes. Several years back, my family and my neighbor's family, neighbor is one of my best friends, are hiking in northern New Mexico in Mount Touch-Me-Not, which is connected by a ridge to Mount Baldy, the famous mountain all the Boy Scouts hike in Philmont. On this hike is me, 15-year-old male, my dad, my brother, 13, my neighbor, 14-year-old male, his parents and his 2 sisters, 12 and 10. My dad and I have hiked the same trail half a dozen times in years past, and seeing as it wasn't too hard, we took everyone up. To get to the start, you drive up 2/3 of the mountain, then hike from there. We reached the peak early in the day, probably before 12 or 1. After a nice picnic and some pictures, we're ready to follow the trail down. My dad leads. The first part is down a rocky slope, which we all handle just fine. Then the trail leads into the cover of trees. Keep in mind it's less of a trail and more of a connect-the-dots style hike where you follow cairns. Keep in mind it's less of a trail and more of a connect-the-dots style of hike where you follow down all the way with little piles of rocks that let you know you're going the right way. Anyway, once we hit the trees, I take the lead for a half an hour or so with my neighbor. I have to stop, tie my shoe, so my little brother takes the lead. My neighbor and I end up at the back of our group, which is fine. But after about 30 minutes of hiking, I look around and notice something funny. I ask my dad, "Hey, when was the last cairn?" He didn't know. We had all been talking to each other, content letting my brother lead. We ask him when he saw the last cairn. His response, "What's a cairn?" F. Now in hindsight, hiking back up and finding the trail would have been the smart move. It would have only cost us an hour or so, but my dad was sure he knew where we were and that he could get us back going right, thinking we wandered left. I thought the opposite, as did my neighbor. But our dads were in charge, so right we went. So we're hiking, and hiking, and hiking. No trail. It's getting late. After lots of debate, we convince our dads to hang up their egos and call the search and rescue, which we do. They send a fleet because it's getting late and we're in the mountains, a line without any gear. They're all out blowing whistles and horns and asking us if we hear anything. We don't. We weren't totally lost. We could see the city we came from in the distance, sort of. So we keep moving. Search and rescue never finds us. But we make it to the city around 9 p.m. A 3-hour round trip turned into an 11-hour ordeal. The 10-year-old girl was a trooper. The kicker? Before we left, my brother got into an argument with my dad about wearing hiking socks. He didn't want to because he thought they looked silly. so he wore ankle socks. He had blisters covering his entire heel when we got back. I mean like 3 inches or so in diameter. Too long didn't read. Went hiking and my brother leads us off the trail. The 2 dads on the trip make matters worse. Search and rescue are no help. Next story. My father intentionally left us 3 kids, 12, 8, and 7, on a hike about 1 mile away from where we camped. He left us a picnic box, stated he needed to go get something, but would be back in a few minutes. We sat, ate, oblivious to time. About an hour passes. We are suddenly very aware that we are very alone. Big brother and I stay put and call for dad loudly for about 15 to 20 minutes. Little sis cleans up and tries not to freak. We then decide to pack up and head back for camp because we are pretty confident on how to get back. During our little hike away from camp, Dad had pointed out several nearby identifying landmarks on our way. A large boulder that looked like a nose, a skunky smelling area, a pile of trash with a zombie-looking rubber duck. He seemed to make a very stern deal out of these things. We used the landmarks to find our way back, the whole while leaving stone arrows in the trail we are walking every 50 to 100 feet. My little sister was scratching one long continuous line in the trail too. Any wrong turns, and we headed back to the last arrow. Easy peasy. We made it back easily, and we were rewarded with some really nice s'mores. Little did we know that our dad had been testing us to see whether we were paying attention to taking notes of landmarks, north and south directions, staying on the left under the highway, etc. He had been silently following us a distance away, making sure we were in no harm. He did many little tests like this that regularly helped ingrain survival skills better than simply being told. Next story. I was 22 years old and was left or lost behind on my first float trip ever. We traveled to Steelville, Montana, planning on having some fun on the river while of course drinking very heavily. Being excited, I didn't sleep the night prior and also a heavy drinker at the time. Of course, this sounds like fun. Other than a heavy drinker, I was also a heavy person, probably topping out at 340-ish pounds. This will become relevant later. Anywho, about 11 a.m., we head out on the river to have some fun. It's a hot day, but we at least have cool beverages to keep us company. At this time, I fancied Bud Ice, 5.9% ABV and cheap to boot. I bought an 18-pack specifically just for the float. The hours pass, beers are running low, I know I'm hammered at this time. We make a stop on a sandbar to mess around. I specifically remember going out to the middle of the river to take a pee through my swimming trunks because YOLO. Off to the side in the middle of the river, there is a mini sandbar. So I decided to sit in the middle of it and make a little sandcastle. My friend Chad comes over and he's helping me for a little bit. Well, while this is going on, the group all load up into the raft and sorta leave him. Another friend who was too drunk to comprehend what was going on and I behind a little bit. Finally, they stop. Chad and drunk friend jump in. I try to jump, but I'm too heavy to jump out of this deeper part of the water, so I tell them I'll just hold onto the side and float along until it's shallow. We hit a current. I'm sucked under the raft a bit, and in between all the jagged rocks in the raft, I start getting a Charlie horse in my calf and I let go. I sit up, clenching the back of my leg, screaming Charlie horse as they are floating down the S-current. They manage to stop for a second, but then I get a Charlie horse in my other calf as well, and I can't stand up to walk. I wave them on, thinking I knew where I was going. So they disappear around the bend, moving hatefully thanks to the current. I finally get my legs to work again, after about 3 minutes, and start walking towards the corner of the bend, thinking they would be right around the corner. Nope. So I look around. I see a house up on the edge of the cliffside. I start climbing the cliffside. It was most of an inclined hill that wasn't very steep. To see if possible, there is a side access road or something. In the process of climbing, one of my water shoes falls apart and the sole comes off of it. I finally get up to the house, and it's surrounded by a huge cornfield. I knock on the door and get no answer. So by now, in my drunken state, I'm starting to freak out real bad. I climbed back down the cliffside and began to head upstream. Yes, upstream, because I think I know my way back to the beginning of the campsite where we started our float. So I start my little adventure, heading back upstream with one water shoe and being attacked by Amazon-sized flies who wouldn't stop biting my head, all while still being drunk. I'm walking for about 30 minutes, and it's starting to get drunk, and the sober realization is starting to hit me that I'm lost. Eventually, I run out of area to walk and have to start swimming upstream in the pitch black. I end up swimming roughly for an hour, listening to the frogs ribbit my name. Aaron, or so before I said, F it, I'm tired. So I stop at an enclosed sandbar and just lay down in the sand, decide to take a nap. I'm not sure how long I was out, but I woke up and thought I saw people about 10 feet away from me just standing in the water while staring at me. I get up and start shouting out my friends' names with no replies. I think it's really them just messing with me. I start trying to throw rocks at them, but still no answer, so I decide to step in after them. Heck no, the water is freezing cold, so I'm sitting on the sandbar like F. Right then and there, I saw a huge light coming down the river accompanied by a loud siren. I started screaming, "Help! Help! Help!" A boat pulls off to the side with 2 cop-looking fellows and a German shepherd. As they pull up, they ask me, "We're looking for a girl on a missing kayak. Have you seen her?" I promptly tell them no and ask for a ride. One of the officers chuckled and said, "Well, we need to find her, so we'll send another boat to come back for you in a little bit." I remember pausing and asking if he was serious, but luckily they were both just messing with me. Finally, they get me back to the campsite and it's 4 a.m. Some of my friends were still awake waiting for me, claiming that they almost called my mom and had no realization that I was gone until about an hour after they got back to the campsite. The bottoms of both of my feet were bruised up. I was sunburned. I had cuts and scrapes all over my body, but I was alive. The kicker? 2 other people from our group got lost too, but found their way back to the campsite. From there on out, our float trips events were renamed from Wasted on the River to Lost on the River. Well, did they ever find the little girl they lost on the kayak? What happened to her? Well, first off, glad this guy and everyone else made it home safe, but I need more updates, man. Next story. Effing score. Have I got a story for all of you? The time I drove a motorbike through a tropical swamp cum forest at night by moonlight with a broken leg. Let's set the scene. It's an island in the Philippines. Now you're probably imagining old growth forests and jungle, but the wilderness on this island was mostly palm forest and swampland. Probably tropical savanna, if one was pressed for a classification. As you will find on most Visayan islands, there was a beachy resort area with a few tourist lodgings of various qualities. Catering to the tourist at said establishments were rental places renting out vehicles of even more varying quality. I, being young and therefore both poor and foolhardy, rented the cheapest Chinese-made dirt bike extant in the town. I used said bike lightly for a day around the beach, and in unwitting preparation for my great adventure the following day, a component in the rear broke and had to be replaced at the shop. Now you see, I'd seen some maps and there was a second town, we'll call that Town B, with a beach several hours distance away by a provincial highway. The highway itself took a large detour around an area of forest, skirting the coast and keeping as far away from the area as it is possible without physically propelling yourself into the ocean. However, there was a map sneakily hidden in the darkest corner of a local restaurant that told a different story. The map was faded, as the mining or plantation venture it was produced for had long since folded. But behind the brown tinge and 60s topography was the unmistakable dotted line of a trail cutting from one curve of the highway to another and eliminating half the distance. So, the next morning I got up bright and early to drive to Town B, packing some beach gear and making emphatically sure not to pack something totally unnecessary like a torch. I trundled along the highway for a little while, being passed at breakneck speed by trucks and jeepneys belching black smoke until I hit my turnoff. The initial part of the secondary road was cement, good sign, and I followed it through some villages. Rice paddies gave way to more and more palm trees, and the road itself became gravel. With every passing mile, the houses became scarcer, the palm trees became denser, and the road became wetter, more rutted and more orange with clay. Roughly 90 minutes passed between the final house I saw on one side and the first one I saw on the other. The road itself was literally a walking track in width for a good 45 of those minutes, all mud and rock with deep drainage marks crisscrossing the surface and puddles everywhere. One pool was almost an engine killer in depth and length and required a lot of coaxing to get the bike to not suffocate. I was absolutely filthy. My wrists, my biceps were aching. My teeth were almost rattled out of my gums, but I'd made good time and it was not even noon when I reached Town B. Going from A to B had been a complete success. So as you could imagine, I strutted around the beach all afternoon with the smuggest expression humanly possible. Anyway, During the afternoon, I decided I could backtrack through the same route because I'd done it once, and if you do something once, nothing bad can ever happen in any of the subsequent times because you know everything there is to know. Well, by the time I reached the last house on the side of Town B, it was late afternoon. Logically, I sped up, because the secret to avoiding the dangers of reduced visibility is to outrun it. Now, the back of the bike was bouncing around like wild, but I was making good time. That was until the part that was fixed the previous day gave way again. Of course, that wasn't immediately clear at the time. What it felt like was the bike was making a hard right into the foliage, while I clung on with one hand until the side of the bike went thunk into a tree and it thunked me off into the mire. I went flying one way, landing on my back, and the bike went bouncing another, landing quite miraculously on the road, or however you'd describe it. I don't know if you're meant to pass out after that kind of thing, because my body did the opposite, and basically flung myself on the bike to get it upright. Unfortunately, adrenaline can only do so much, and I soon felt this ridiculously intense throbbing rising from my right leg. My kneecap took the full force of the tree trunk, and basically all the skin was hanging off. Bone and muscle was not visible, but a lump of skin about the size of my palm was hanging down, and the kneecap itself was visibly strange. Later learned it was fractured in several places. I fell on my butt when I realized the enormity of being absolutely unable to walk the distance necessary to get help. Amazingly, the bike motor was still running, and although basically all the brake pedal and protrusions on the right side were bent up against the bike, and every piece of bodywork was hanging off, the only fundamental problem with the bike was the broken rear axle. In a stroke of luck that could have only come from divine power, the axle rod that had been taken out of the bike the previous day was still in with the tool set provided in the storage. I know it sounds contrived, but rather than fix the issue, the owner had replaced one axle rod with an even older one, taken $5 to do so, and put the existing, pretty much fine, one back in the toolkit. In the last light of the day, I took apart the rear of the bike and replaced the parts as best as I could with my limited knowledge of motorcycles. Limited, much to the chagrin of my uncle, who was quite into them, and reassembled it from memory. By now, dusk was becoming night. I still had what was 1 hour of driving during the day to complete, and my leg was pretty much stained red with blood and pretty much immovable. It took a good while, and a good deal of struggling to even mount the bike. However, practically everything else was hand-operated, including the ignition, so it was drivable. Drivable in a sense because the lights were broken and I was in a pitch-black rainforest covered in puddles and rocks and vines. In hindsight, it may have been smarter to wait the night, but I gunned the throttle and started moving as slow as was possible without stalling. Now the night happened to be clear and the moon was gibbous, so there was a slight but noticeable amount of light shining down on the road. The human eye is amazing when it comes to that, and with every passing minute moving at walking pace, the path became clearer. This means one vaguely lighter shade of gray compared to another, but it was enough to avoid rolling off the beaten track too often or making further thunks against trees. Throttle, idle, more throttle to clear a rock, idle. Really ridiculously slowly for hours, until I hit the largest puddle that I'd ever met the last time. This one was quite visible with the moon reflecting off it. I wasn't really in any position to push the bike across, so I crossed my fingers and let the bike roll in and drove as straight as possible. All was fine until the last meters after the puddle where, to my horror, there was a deep patch of mud I'd avoided before. The rear wheel gets stuck deep. My leg is destroyed, so there's no way I can brace myself and manhandle the bike out. Having come so far, I go absolutely animalistic and force all my weight forward on the handlebars while gunning the throttle as hard as it will go to the lowest gear. The bike starts to smell like burning, but gradually the rear wheel wrenches itself forward and I slide the mother effer out of the deep mud with all the fury of an old-timey deity they'd sacrifice children to, and then I tipped over face first into some shallow mud. Anyway, it got easier from there, and at about 5 a.m., I dragged my sorry, muddy butt through the gates of a local clinic, who patched me up and then called an ambulance that took me into an even better clinic. The owner settled the damage for literally $50 because his dodgy bike repair was obviously to blame, and he didn't want to be chewed out or extorted by the police, particularly because the provincial government was doing everything short of intimate favors, and I guarantee you that was happening behind closed doors to generate tourism. Holy crap, dude, we just went on an adventure. That was like 4 pages. Oh, glad he made it out safe because this guy's quite the author. Next story. Not lost per se, just delayed to such a massive extent we were wondering if we were lost. Went for a canoe trip on the river in Michigan's Upper Peninsula with no liveries. We talked about our hopes to do the river with our campground staffers, and they gave us a good drop-in and picked up location. We were expecting a 5-hour trip. We originally intended to hit the river at 10 a.m., but due to lunch delay and driving the cars between the sites, we didn't hit the river until about 1 p.m. The first few hours were perfect, secluded river hours, but before long the water was regularly shallow enough for us to bottom out no matter where we were on the river. Lots of scooting and walking alongside the boat followed. Long story short, we ended up boating until the sun went down and decided to keep at it. Our pickup location was a dam, not something we could easily miss even in the dark. Well, after we were all soaked and going through mild class 1 and 2 rapids in pitch blackness, we finally bedded down for a rest around midnight on a solid rock beach. Thank God we got a fire going, hit the river bright and early again at first light, and finally made it to the dam around noon. Some of the house owners with riverfront property near the dam let us know that multiple law enforcement agencies were searching for us and waiting at the dam. We then feasted on a case of Pringles we had in one of the vehicles, and it was glorious. None of us had food or overnight gear or clothing we took off. My sister and friends, 16 at the time, were waiting for us at the campground through our ordeal and had no idea what was going on as we were going to have dinner together. They notified the campground staff that we were MIA around dinner. They, in turn, got the authorities involved. The 5-hour trip would be accurate if we were in kayaks, but we had canoes, and it was in the peak of the spring runoff. It was mid-July. The staffer very nearly got fired for his help. Next story. I was meeting some friends at Ashridge Forest, UK. My cab dropped me outside the stately home instead of the visitor center. No phone signal, obviously, so I asked a pair of friendly dog walkers to point me in the right direction, and off I go. After nearly 2 hours of staggering through the woods and across golf courses, can't talk to the golf people, they're scary, I'd eaten all the jammy Dodgers. I chased after a man I thought was my friend. That man was a plastic bag. Eventually found my friends, but I was never trusted to look after the biscuits ever again. Next story. So I had a good friend whose parents owned a tourist fishing camp in northern Ontario, which could only be reached by a 45-minute flight or a 1.5-hour train ride. One winter I head out there with him and another friend to do a job for another camp on the lake. The job involves shoveling snow into a half-buried shed that is filled with Rubbermaid storage bins and containing ice. The snow and ice last for most of the summer, and it's how they refrigerate. Job goes good, make some money, drink, snowmobile around, sleep in the winterized cabin, and in general have a good time. Following year, I get a call from the camp down the lake. My friend is unavailable, so they want to know if I'll do it myself. Sure, why not? What could go wrong? So I pack up all my gear, take a train ride 1.5 hours into the northern Ontario wilderness in the middle of winter, and head to the camp. I get off the train into a nice snowfall and a temp of minus 25 Celsius. Running off of memory, I started out on the lake towards the camp. Not even 5 minutes out onto the lake, the ice starts to break. I manage to get a couple of steps once this happens, throw my gear while jumping forward and sprawling out spread eagle. So my body is half in the winter, half out. Somehow I manage to wriggle clear of the water and collect my gear. I'm soaked. It's minus 25. My only option is to get to the cabin and get dry and warm, or I die. So I hike about 2 kilometers around a peninsula and expect to see the cabin in the bay, which it wasn't. I had gone the wrong direction, so I now need to backtrack and head the other way, adding extra time. I finally reached my destination, half frozen and definitely feeling the effects of hypothermia. I'd been shaking uncontrollably for the better part of 2 hours. Now there was supposed to be a cabin left unlocked and stocked with wood and a pile out back. However, there was no cabin left unlocked and definitely no wood inside or otherwise. So I made a fire of the little bit of wood in the wood box and proceeded to burn everything I possibly could. This included chairs, kitchen table, the wood box itself. It wasn't much, but it did the trick. I was warm and my clothes were drying. I even managed to heat up some soup. After warming up enough, I threw my stuff back on and went and broke into the other cabins looking for wood. There wasn't much, but I thought it'd last for the night. So I threw it on the fire and went to sleep. I'm not sure what time I woke up at. Watch was frozen solid. But I was shivering uncontrollably again and looking in a mirror by candlelight. I could see my lips were purple and my face white as a ghost. I knew that I had to get warm, that if I went back to sleep I wouldn't be waking up in the morning. So I got dressed, put my boots on, I was still in my gear, and I went out to get wood. Luckily it was a full moon, and I was able to see fairly well. I started by shoveling up every heap of snow I could see, looking for the alleged woodpile. The only thing I found, however, was a stump. Knowing the stump wouldn't be enough, I grabbed an axe and started to cut down green trees. I managed to get a fair bit in, and with the help of a few more broken chairs from other cabins and some kerosene, I got a fire going. The smoke from the green pine branches filled the cabin, making my eyes water, but I didn't care. I was warm. The following day, the first thing I did was cut down some more trees. I made sure I had enough to keep the fire going all day and night. Other than that, the rest of the time went by all right. I got the job done, had a good night's sleep, and caught the train the next morning. Needless to say, when asked the following year, I declined the job. Too long didn't read. Fall through ice in the wilderness. Burn everything but the kitchen sink in a cabin to stay alive. Next story. Went backpacking in the San Gabriel Wilderness in California for a few days when a fire started in 2002-2003. We got cut off from our exit and got stranded. We were trying to follow a fork of the river, San Gabriel River, but the fire was charging down the ravine and cut us off. We were about 10 miles in and had to figure out how to circumnavigate the fire. It was really effing scary. It was really windy, smoky, and overall, scary. Giant towers of smoke were just piling up in the air. Search and rescue was buzzing the area along with fire planes dumping water and chemicals. The red stuff? Finally, we get to the top of the ridge and see where we would go from there. Water was getting short, as we were anticipating being able to use river water, and we see that we can get over to the next ridge and cut back down to the river. We set the compass and move out. We got back down to the river and filled up on water. We had been up and moving since early AM when we started to hear the planes and helicopters. We were effing exhausted, miserable. Our lungs hurt, our legs hurt, we were all tired. The detour took us another 3 to 4 miles out of the way, added another 4,000 feet of elevation gain, and ticks, mother effing ticks, I hate ticks. So we finally get back to the river. We fill up on water and we can't stop. The fire is on our backs at this point, and we think it's advancing towards us. We have about 8 more miles to go, and we're all seriously considering dropping all of our gear, grabbing the water filter and bottles, and just book it down the riverbed. We decide not to and just tough it out, which I am so glad that we didn't. After about another hour of making it down the river, we run into a search and rescue squad. We all were just blown away. I couldn't believe that this was even happening, or would ever happen in my life. It was just surreal. We weren't lost anymore once we got back down to the river, but now we had help and encouragement. Their search and rescue team was also equally surprised, looking at us covered in dirt and ash, wheezing, just plain beat. They told us that we had to get moving, as the fire was running along the ridge parallel to the river and was coming down the ravine. We booked it the F out of there and got to our cars, which we then had to drive what normally would be a 2-hour drive, now a 5-hour drive due to conditions and traffic. The only way they knew we were back there was because of our cars and a note I left in the dash. How many people, how long we are going to be gone, and where we are headed to. We were all so tired. I went back to an area and we passed through on our hike after the fire. Months later, the area was completely scorched. We would have been some crispy critters if we slacked and rested. Link to the wiki about the fire. Next story. Alright, let me tell you guys the story of how I got lost on a mountain and nearly died. Years on and years ago in the early 2000s, I was at a summer camp as a counselor in upstate New York, Camp Olmsted. It was a sleepaway camp, and we took care of kids there from like 8 a.m. to 10 p.m. The activities of the day were split into roughly 50-minute blocks, all except for one. This activity was about 2 hours put together, and it happened about once or twice a week. It was the Storm King mountain climb. Now, it wasn't a grab a rock and climb style mountain. It was walk a path for a little while, yay, you're climbing a mountain style mountain. Anyway, 2 hours was never enough time to get to the top, and we always had to turn back at the hour and change mark. You try taking a bunch of inner city kids on a hike, and you see how far you can go before they start wheezing and screaming bloody murder. Anyway, this particular day I had some free time after the climb, so I told my partner to take the kids back down. I was going to continue the rest of the climb by myself, be back in an hour. This had always been the plan, so I had the groundskeeper assistant, who was around my age, we were 19, come with me so I could have a climbing buddy. Anyway, 45 minutes later, we made it to the top. We kinda lost track of the path along the way, but we made it. That was all that mattered. I actually saw a bald eagle flying around and saw some town that was crazy far away. It freaked me out how high we were, but the view made it all worth it. Anyway, it was time to get down. We didn't remember which way we came, so we just went in the general direction we felt we came until we saw the path again. Needless to say, we never saw the path. Of course, our 19-year-old minds figured if we keep going down, we'll eventually get off the mountain. Well, it turns out crap gets real once you get off the path. Thorns everywhere, animals wandering around. At some point, gnats just started swarming around our heads and refused to leave. It turns out our plans had some kinks. You see, after a while, the hills became very steep, and we resorted to sliding on our butts as a method of travel. Walking just became too dangerous. We nearly fell and tumbled quite a few times. Anyway, I started doing some last-action hero slide. I was going way too fast, and at the last minute, I grabbed a mini-tree before I went over the horizon. We went towards it because we thought it was yet another steep hill, and we were right. 90-degree angle steep. I nearly fell off of what looked like a 5-story drop, and it was 5 stories to the treetops. Who knows how far it actually was? So my buddy is freaking out, but for some reason I can't explain, I wasn't even scared. I was more worried that we're late and we're going to get in trouble, I'm going to get fired. I didn't want to get fired because I loved this job. I was basically getting paid to play around with the kids, and I liked all my coworkers. At this point, we were about 20-30 minutes late, and I was banking on my head counselor not noticing. I planned on just casually walking back to my group and acting like nothing was wrong. My buddy, on the other hand, was upset because he watches Toonami, and today Frieza started fighting Goku. He thought that this might have been the episode where he goes Super Saiyan. He was obviously freaking out. That was cut and dry gallows humor. Anyway, after much butt sliding, dead ends, and improvising, we finally saw a road. We celebrated, got on it, and began randomly walking in a direction. Eventually, a bike, some stereotypical biker-looking dude with an American flag bandana, leather jacket, shades, blonde facial hair, and a girl on the back, rode by. They looked about in their 40s or so. It was a long road, so I had more than enough time to flag them down. I asked him where Camp Olmsted was, and he said it was about 2 miles in the direction we were going. We thanked him, continued on our way, and had the bright idea to put dirt in our hair, because maybe that'd give us more sympathy points if we wouldn't be fired. At this point, our clothes are beyond filthy. I had the bright idea to wear white clothes that day. We have gnats swarming our hair, and now we have dirt in there as well. After some light jogging, we eventually make it back. Groundskeeper Jr. goes back to his post, and I creep back to my cabin and tell my partner the adventure. I ask him if the head counselor asked me about it, and he said, nah, I thought I got away with it scot-free. So as I begin to recall the highlights of it, guess who appears? The head counselor with a huge backpack complete with a grappling hook wrapped around his chest. Literally, a grappling hook. I've never in my life saw a grappling hook, and I still haven't since that day. "What the F you doing, son?" he said sternly. It was a Christian summer camp, and I had never heard this guy use profanity before. My partner immediately disappeared out of the room. It was like he had no frames of animation. His upper body just moved towards the door without movement. I got off light, though. The head counselor was a friend of the family and was the main reason I got the job. The talk was mainly about how I made a stupid decision. If I died, he'd have to tell my family, and etc., etc. But at the end of the day, I wasn't fired. Got to the top of the mountain and have this awesome story to tell people. Totally worth it. Next story. Too long didn't read. Skated across the country. Got lost in the desert. Ate a hot dog. Pretty glorious. A few years ago, I decided to test a new tent out by skateboarding out of town. I had so much fun I just kept going and skated clear across the country. The story got around a little bit, and Warren Miller, ski god, even wrote about it in the Vale Daily. While skating through Utah, I decided I would skate across the salt pans and desert to cut off a few miles of road. Growing up in Massachusetts, I was used to 1 inch on a map only being a few miles. In Utah, I was wrong. Thinking it would be beautiful and neat to go through a few miles of desert, I left the road at a 45-degree angle to intersect another road. After about 20 miles, I was starting to panic. My water was gone, and after passing dozens of dead cow and animal bones bleached by the sun, I started to worry. Nobody would ever find my body. Nobody would ever know where I went, and I imagined my own bones sitting out there forever. After about 30 miles, I got to a point where I thought I could still get back to the road behind me, or could hope that the road was less than 30 miles ahead. That was the point at which I guessed I could travel no further. My water was long gone at that point. I decided to wait until night to see if I could see any lights of cars or homes. I set my tent up for shade and waited. I didn't know one's mouth could feel so dry. After dusk, I roused myself and saw car lights about 10 miles in the distance, and waited until the coolest part of the night to continue traveling. After what felt like forever, I walked into a gas station looking like a zombie, drank a gallon of water, and ate a croissant-wrapped hot dog. No meal in my life has ever tasted better. Next story. I went to Finland to work for a few months. The first day I worked, I got a bus from Vinkila to Turku. I did my day's work and got the bus back. Now, Finland is a little different than the UK. Everywhere looks the same. Tall trees, no landmarks, a few of the same shops dotted about. I saw a shop that I thought was a shop I recognized in Vinkila. Nope. I was closer to Limu than anywhere else, and there were no more buses, so I started to walk in the direction the bus headed. It got dark fast and started to snow heavily. The ground was already covered in snow, and there were no streetlights anywhere. I kept walking, and every now and again a car would zoom past me. I was walking on some kind of motorway. I was wearing all black, so people wouldn't have been able to see me. I get sprayed with ice-cold slush from passing cars quite a few times, but had nowhere else to walk. Next to the road was a sort of ditch filled with water, before a load of fields. This went on for what seemed like hours, and it was getting too dark for me to see anything. Plus, the snow blowing in my face constantly made it impossible to tell where I was going. Finally, I saw a driveway that went off into the trees at the other side of the road and lights into the trees. I ran across the road and followed the driveway. I basically fell to my knees at someone's door and banged on it until someone answered. An old lady came and peered through a gap in the door. When she heard me speaking English, she went to get some guy, I guess her son. He came to the door and asked me what was wrong. So I told him what had happened and that I was lost and where I was going. He was nice enough to drive me all the way back to where I was staying. I had been walking the wrong way. It seemed like we were driving forever before we arrived. That was the single greatest act of kindness I've ever received. I kept thinking I was going to die when I was walking and thinking about my family at home finding out and being in the papers and how awful it all was. I'll never forget the kindness that some random Finn showed me. Next story. 2 years ago, I was on an Arctic survival training in Nunavut, Canada. In February. No trees can grow there. Nothing but rocks and snow. The crap's cold. Anyways, our group is about 150 people. We'd all move on snowmobiles and set up camp every night. We were guided by a group of Inuit rangers. Real tough guys. We moved in convoys, one behind another, always following the same tracks in case we got lost. Rule of thumb is if you can't see the guy behind you, you stop until the entire convoy stops and regroups. Well, one day, while on a run back from the new camp to pick up people and supplies, we hit a blizzard. We are on sea ice. Anywhere you look is flat, white, cold nothingness as far as the eye can see, which isn't very far with the wind and snow, maybe 20 meters. We were trying to get back as fast as possible. Too fast, apparently. I look back and can't see anyone behind me, so I stop. I look in front of me to see a blurred silhouette in dim tailgate light disappear in this white abyss. I look back again. I'm alone. Of course, I don't panic. The system worked all the time, so I wait. But after a couple of minutes, I get anxious. What if the guy behind me passed me in the blizzard and found the convoy? Our faces are completely covered and we wear the same gear. There's no way of identifying each other. They wouldn't know I was missing until they reached camp. Or what if the convoy turned back and found them but not me? Or what if everyone behind me is just waiting on the next one as planned? So I sit on my ride. and I wait until I think there's no way they haven't catched up yet. F this, I'm going to find the convoy and see what's up. So I start moving, and I look down at the snow. No tracks. F. The wind swept them away? How? It's been like 10 minutes tops. I'm screwed. I start moving in the direction I think is right when suddenly I hear someone coming. It's a gosh dang ranger. A northern tough man wearing an effing hoodie with a rifle on his back and a cigarette in his leathery lips. In a blizzard, he leads me to the convoy, the entire convoy. Turns out the group behind me did pass right by me and we didn't notice. We keep going like nothing happened, and that was the most terrifying experience of my life. Next story. I was in New Orleans shortly after Katrina to do volunteer work. It was weird because all the road streets and signs were gone after all the flooding, etc. Also at that time I didn't have GPS, and when I left to do some quick surveys of the area at night, I decided not to bring a map of the city. As you can imagine, I got lost pretty fast, and when I realized I was circling around the similar-looking area, I started to panic. Remind you, it was shortly after Katrina, so no street signs, barely functioning street lamps, so felt stuck in a haunted town. However, luckily at the time, I had a compass, the one you stick on the dashboard, with me, and I knew at the time I left the FEMA camp, I knew the general direction I was heading to. Also, I knew the camp was located near this big, bright bridge, which I caught a glimpse of as I was frantically driving around. So, with those two, I finally made myself back to camp, and what a relief it was. Next story. For me, I was working in a wilderness park in northern Ontario. I lived alone in the cabin of the main campground, which was seldom used. The cabin was on lake connected to a vast network of other lakes. The particular lake I was on connected to two distinct lakes by way of two distinct rivers. I had been planning on learning how to solo paddle a canoe for some time and had my chance living on this lake. The long weekend was coming up and I wanted to do a little 2-night solo trip to one of the connected lakes. I thought this would be a good way to learn, by throwing myself into the deep end and doing a very short solo trip. I would only be about 10 kilometers of paddling and then I would base camp. I figured I had so much time, even if I zigzagged the whole time, I would be fine. The long weekend came. I had set my alarm for before sunrise to give myself as much time as possible and to take advantage of the glass lake surface of the morning. This particular morning was extremely foggy, probably 5-foot visibility on the lake itself, 15 feet on the ground, and I am relatively experienced in orienteering. So just used my compass to navigate across the lake I was situated. I was going to a river due southeast, and the other river was due south. When I got to where the river was supposed to be, there was nothing. So I followed the shore until I found it. I paddled down the river for a couple of hours until the fog lifted. I should mention it was a slow-moving river, maybe 20 feet wide. I heard voices in front of me and was surprised as the route I had planned was barely traveled. When I came to the other paddlers, they informed me I was on the wrong river, which wasn't a big deal because I knew exactly where I was. However, the note I left at the cabin had the other river and lake as my destination. I pushed ahead and finally found a campsite on the lake, which was quite large. By that time, the fog had fully lifted and the sky was clear. It was nice, so I had taken off my shirt hours before to get a tan. However, at my campsite I realized was suffering from some form of heat illness. I was delirious, talking to myself, not seeing straight, feeling cold and clammy. I knew it was heat exhaustion. For the record, heat stroke is fatal unless medical attention is given, kinda like drowning. Heat exhaustion is the final step before stroke. I was conscious enough to know something was wrong, so I took out my first aid and saw the treatment was to soak in cool water. So I put on my life jacket, got in the lake. I lasted about 5 minutes because the lake was still super cold, even though it was 30 degrees out. Obviously, the 5-minute soak did nothing. Next, I had the bright idea to paddle across the lake to an island to try fishing. I got the island, tried catching some bass, I saw protected a nest. No luck. I walked around the island a bit, and after falling down a ledge and knocking myself up, I paddled back. Now I was really not feeling well. I set up my tent in the shade with no fly and laid on top of my mattress in my boxers with the cool wind against my cold, clammy skin. I pounded maybe 600 milliliters of water. I know, not much, but that is all I could handle. It was about 6 p.m. by this time. I literally thought I might not wake up. I wasn't even scared, I just pictured it taking them a while to find my body as I wasn't even on the correct lake. Luckily, I did wake up at noon the next day. I slept 18 hours straight. Anyone who camps knows it is hard to sleep in that late or straight through the night. I took a very small and potent pee and paddled back against a huge headwind, which was crappy, and had a beer when I got in. I did learn how to solo paddle pretty well. For the next 5 to 10 years, I have been more sensitive to heat, but I survived. I would say I am advanced now when it comes to solo paddling. Next story. This is my dad's story. This was back in the 80s in the USSR. My dad and his buddies took month-long trips every summer to kayak down the many waterways in the USSR. He has some great stories, but this one was kind of dangerous. They were up north, way north, beyond the Arctic Circle. They were so far north that their compass was wrong. Excuse my limited understanding of navigation, but I think the difference between magnetic north and true north gives a greater error when you're so far north. Long story short, they got lost. Remember, this is back in the 80s in northern Russia. It was in July or August, so the temperature was okay. They also had plenty of fresh water, tents, etc. But they had no idea how to get to the nearest town, which was at least a few hundred miles away. If they missed it, the next town would be even farther. They fished for food but didn't have guns to hunt. They spent about 3 weeks being lost and were saved by a geological team that was working in the area that they ran into by a miracle. The geologists gave the accurate coordinates and corrected their compass error. They walked and kayaked down to a road on a railroad and made their way back to civilization. If it wasn't for the geologists, they would have stayed lost and probably frozen to death in about a month when the weather changed.